Hello and welcome to Hair in the Hawthorn. Welcome back. And before I get into saying hello to my co-host, I'm not going to make any stupid comments today about that because I can't think of any other than Bert and Ernie, but that was last one. So before I get into saying a warm welcome to co-host and guest today, in the vein of what we're going to be talking about, I've got a little bit of a challenge for you as viewers out there, and it will become apparent as you hear us talk. So I'm going to test people's abilities, if you like, who are watching this. And I'm going to leave this running, I think, for around about a month and see what people get. I have a golden box and I've placed an object in this golden box. And what I want to do is I want to see if anybody gets any flavour of what may be in this box. So leave your comments below or come on to the Facebook page, which is Hair in the Hawthorn YT community, and have a chat about anything that you may get, any colours, any shapes, any numbers, anything, any symbology that you get from that. So that might give you a bit of a clue about what we're talking about today on this episode. Just say hello and welcome to Neil because he got a little bit miffed with me for not giving him a warm welcome last time.
Hello, Kate.
Hey,
Nice to be with you.
it's always good to be with you, Neil. And we have a returning guest. Now, if you haven't seen, we did an interview with this guest. Oh, it seems forever ago. But if you scroll down, I think is it Flying Snakes and Saucers, something like that. I'll link
Yeah.
the caption up in the comments. But we've got Bob Digby back with a subject that we were going to talk about on the back of the subject that we talked about before, but we never got round to because we got super excited about what we're chatting about and it never happened. So I'm not going to explain what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to let Bob do the explaining. So, Bob, thank you so much for coming back and talking to us.
Yeah, and a warm welcome to Neil as well. I don't want him feeling left out here. I have a feeling he's going to have some scientific questions for me. But thank you for having me back. We do have unfinished business. It seems that you invite me along to deal with what I would call the dodgy subjects. I know how uncomfortable you were with UFOs. I may have to venture back into that territory.
Please
So
do.
you'll have to forgive me. We might be wandering around because there have been some developments since I did that. It was called From Flying Snakes to Flying Saucers. Yes, we got into a lot of territory there, but I will behave myself tonight and keep this within an hour. So I'll try not to get carried away. And I think Neil will keep an eye on the clock anyway and bang the gavel if it gets a bit out of hand.
Yeah,
But
that's a
thank you
deal.
for having me back. I'm really pleased to be back. A lot's happened. I mentioned off air that I've got new bionic eyes, so I can see super clearly. And I know you've even moved the location of the hawthorn hedge since I was last on, but I
Yeah,
believe Neil is still in the same place.
still in the
Good.
same nest.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, there's no place like home, is there? So that's excellent. Yeah, I'm here to pick up on the unfinished business of remote viewing. So
Yes.
I'm intrigued by your little exercise up front, and yeah, let it run. I'd be very interested to know who can get the right vibes about what's in the box. And I better declare that I honestly don't know myself. So yeah, there's nothing to give
Nobody
away.
knows.
Nobody
Nobody
knows.
knows. So no clues given. I want to just mention just to kick us off. So for those of you who don't know, Haunted Magazine is a fantastic magazine for anything that's paranormal, anything that's weird, strange, etc. Brilliant magazine. I'm not just saying that because I'm a regular writer, but there are some epic writers in here, a lot of which I know personally, and one is Bob. And Bob has written a two-part article. The first part is in out now for Haunted Magazine, which is the winter edition. It's brilliant, and the explanations that you've put in there, and for such a broad subject, you've really packed it in, really packed it in. So I want to kick off with what sounds like a simple question, but it's got some magnitude. I know it has. Of what is remote viewing?
Yeah, deceptively simple question. I wish I had an easy, simple answer to you, but I'm going to give it my best shot.
Yeah.
It's a controlled, trainable mental process, so people can be trained to do this, involving PSI ability. Now, I teach mathematics, so when you talk about PSI, I'm thinking about pounds per square inch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't even use modern measurement methods, but if you go into a garage, they'll tell you your tire pressure is in PSI. But I'm not talking about three-letter acronyms. I'm talking about a noun. So this is a psychic ability, if you will, and it's used to transfer perceptual information across time and space. So it's the process used by so-called psychic spies. I'll come back to this terminology because if you remember when we did flying snakes to flying saucers, we got into some semantics. I think Neil asked me a question about my take on UAPs and that, and it does involve careful use of language. So I'm trying to tread very carefully here, trying not to upset any of your viewers. But I'll come back to that. But psychic spies is a common term that most people are familiar with. And this works in complete violation of the accepted laws of quantum and relativistic physics. So, therefore, there's an implication from that alone that our knowledge of these fields is very, very incomplete. So, remote viewing is normally considered a controlled uh, shifting of awareness that is performed in a normal waking state. So this is not to be confused with channeling and certain other things. It doesn't involve going into a trance or something. So it's a waking state of consciousness, does not typically involve out of the body experience, hypnosis, altered states of consciousness, or channeling. So we may have to come back to that. So these other ways of obtaining information are distinctly different to remote viewing. And then I'll come back to the idea of attempts at a scientific understanding about this. But bear in mind, communication of information at a distance is a problem in science. And it's particularly one that Einstein wasn't at all happy with, because Einstein had no problem accepting that affairs in different places could be how can we correlated, but he didn't accept that an intervention at one location could immediately, with no perception and no transition of time, communicate that state to another particle, for example.
So can I just clarify that for any viewers of a scientific bent into quantum physics? That's called entanglement.
Yep, that's right.
And the experiments during the time of Einstein and afterwards have shown conclusively that any subatomic particles, whether they protons, neutrons, even photons, are able to be introduced to one another in laboratory, then separated, and then communicate with each other at whatever distance that they are separated at. The longest distance that's been done is 16 miles, but that's just because that was done in CERN. That's the longest distance they have. But the implication is that they could be at the other end of the universe, and they faster than the speed of light. If you believe in the speed of light, they will instantly communicate with when one's spin is turned, the other spins in the opposite direction with immediate effect. So that's what Einstein called spooky action at a distance. And he didn't, as you say, Bob, he didn't like it. So sorry, I interrupted.
No,
Go
that
right
is
ahead.
brilliant. No, well, that's why you're here, Neil. This is the balancing it up with the scientific bit, which I'm doing my best to explain. You've banged the nail right on the head. It's what this quantum world is what Einstein called spooky action at a distance, and it relates to the concept of quantum entanglement, which is a bit of a mouthful. And there's also the concept that faster than light communication is just not possible. So you can see the paradox. Because obviously, if something is instantaneous at the other side of the universe, then the speed of light becomes a bit irrelevant. I do believe in it in a vacuum. So you always have to clarify under what circumstances you're talking about the speed of light. In old money, it's very roughly 186,000 miles per second. So that's quite fast. And confusingly, although it's the speed of light, it's actually a distance. So that the units may seem talking about light years as how far away a star might be. It's all very confusing. Funnily enough, I do teach physics and mathematics, and the kids often get mixed up with the concepts of speed equals distance over time. So in terms of very basic, even pre-GCSE maths, you can understand the relationship between speed, distance, and time. But in this context, to say it's totally irrelevant, that there's the paradox.
Mm.
Yep.
So that's a key thing. Yeah, no, thank you for that nice piece of scientific clarification, if I may say so. That's why Neil's
I,
here. I knew there was a good reason.
I mean, I find that fascinating from a human perspective to try and put that into a scientific formula. Um, I do remote viewing, and I do it. I've done it on levels of going into people's properties. I've worked with the police before on that, and to hear it put in that context, I find it very odd and very unusual because I've never questioned it, and the, to hear it being broken down into sort of particles and how it works and how it doesn't work is almost irrelevant to the
Mhm.
experience of it actually happening. It's yeah, it's very weird. It is
Well,
very
it
weird. And
works. Yeah,
yeah.
I'm not sure that we do have a good explanation. I may mention this a bit later on, but a group of remote viewers operate out of Georgia in the United States. So this is an institute called the Farsight Institute.
Mm,
And Dr. Courtney Brown, who's the head of that institute, has had a go at writing a book trying to explain the mechanism of remote viewing.
mm,
He had terrible difficulties getting it published. I hope I haven't got this wrong, but I think he had to go the self-published route in the end
mm.
because conventional academia didn't want to know, didn't want to touch it. So yeah,
Is
it's
that
tricky.
because the I mean, for me, when people think of the word, and I don't like the word remote viewing because of its connotations with the military and because of the experimentation and the data gathering that went off in the military. And it seems like that they were the only ones who were actually collating that data, and then anything outside of that was in the woo-woo world. So people who were outside the military and doing these things were seen as spiritualists or mediums or channeling or and weren't taken in the seriousness that they should have been. So, what was it only the military, or has there been serious academic research outside of that complex into it?
Um, the Farsight Institute is civilian. They have used protocols which were developed from the military protocols that were used for espionage purposes, but
Hmm.
Farsight is civilian.
Hmm.
Um, yes, a driving force was the fact that the Americans believed correctly that the Russians, for example, were way ahead on
Yes.
psychic spying abilities and that sort of thing. So were the Chinese, although less is said or known about what the Chinese are up to. I believe the Chinese are using quite young children with these
Yeah.
abilities, so that these can be trained. But the main one of the main drivers of what was called the Stargate program, which was the American effort on this, was came under a guy called General Albert Stubblebine. Now, I never met General Stubblebine, but this is going to sound really weird. I met his wife, so I had some dealings with his wife. She goes under a different name of Rima Lebeau. If you look her up on Google, I think she's labeled as a conspiracy theorist. So right
Mhm,
there is an attempt to discredit her.
mhm.
Obviously we're not here to talk about her and that, but it's worth looking up. But yes, the driving force was the need to counter what the Russians and the Chinese and any other hostile states might be up to. It did get developed and then some. And funnily enough, in doing my article in Haunted magazine, I enjoyed unprecedented cooperation when I reached out to the remote viewing community. I got far more help and information and material, photographs to publish in the magazine than I dreamt was possible. Now, one of those sources was the estate of Ingo Swan, and Swan was if you like, I think he was remote viewer #1 in the Stargate program. He's dead now, but I got cooperation from, I believe it was his niece, who made all sorts of photographs and information available. It was absolutely fantastic. And
That's brilliant, Scott. Sorry to interrupt again, Bob, but let's come back to Ingo Swann, because
Yeah.
I find that's how I got into remote viewing. Probably not the best route into remote viewing,
oh, I don't know.
but well, let carry on. But we definitely need to
Well,
get
well,
back and discuss Ingo Swann.
let me address something, because there is an elephant in the room, and I'll deal with it right now because it comes back to the work of Ingo Swann. So Ingo Swann had incredible abilities. I hope I haven't got that wrong. He was one of the first remote viewers, if you like, and he came up with the definition of what remote viewing is. So this is where I've got my opportunity, thanks to Neil, that we can clarify the difference between psychic spies, if you want to call them that, and remote viewers. So what do you need for something to be remote viewing? This is a bit like baking a cake. So there are 5 ingredients. Okay, the first ingredient is you need a remote viewer. So this is somebody with some sort of confirmed psychic stroke ESP type ability. The second thing, so you need first of all, you need a remote viewer. So this is an individual designated. They have to have an active ESP ability. So that's the second thing, if you like. So I'm calling that two separate things. An ESP ability in that individual, which can be tested through Xeno cards and other means, or getting the right answer to what's in your gold box, even, Kate. That would be a good test. Um, a blind target to be viewed somewhere in time and space. So you have provided a blind target. Nobody knows except you what's in that, and I can testify to the fact you've given no clues whatsoever. There's just something that's in there that you need to describe. Um, we need somebody or some means of recording the remote viewers' responses. Now, it's not in this article, but in the follow-up article, I hope they're going to use a photograph I've supplied from the Farsight Institute, where they use specially illuminated transparent boards that they write on, and then you can see what the remote viewer is describing, and it's captured more easily on video. But in the original Stargate program, there was an observer who took notes and may also have asked questions. So slightly. And here's the key bit: the difference between psychic ability, or is it a psychic viewing, or is it remote viewing, is confirmatory feedback. So if you can get confirmation, by which that could be photographs or some sort of physical contact or something like that, some sort of independent confirmation of what you've been looking at, that is remote viewing. If you can't get that confirmation, then we're into the realms of psychic ability. And the important thing about that definition, so this is still Swann's work that we're talking about, in order to prove his point, and this is in the article, he made 12 observations about Jupiter, which at the time astronomers were not aware of. And the reason he did it is he knew that the Pioneer 10 spacecraft was on its way, and he thought this would be a good time to get in first. And by the way, the Pioneer 10 didn't confirm all 12 things to begin with. I think it's taken quite a few years and maybe 3 or 4 spacecraft to actually confirm that every one of his observations, such as Jupiter having rings, for example, was correct. So there was physically no way for him to know. And that is the kind of confirmation that a spacecraft have confirmed his findings.
Can I just go back to this concept of when it's psychic and when it's remote viewing? Because to me that it's an egg white and an egg yolk type situation. It's still
Well,
an
yeah.
egg, isn't it? And when you talk to people who remote view to the level of working with the police, or doing it, so it is the data and the evidence can be easily collated. If it's not immediate, then it's within the near future. So what is that difference? Because the process when you speak to these people is very similar to going into a psychic state and going into a state of remote viewing. But it seems very cloudy between the two about the definition. And for me, the definition, it almost comes from that military complex and how they set out a series of experiments to say that they can conclude that it actually works. So what are your thoughts?
Well, funnily enough, with the military remote viewing, one of the problems has been that agencies such as the CIA just not believing what the remote viewers have turned up. And we've
Mm,
seen that in the UFO world. It's what I had a conversation with Alan Hynek about this. It can't be, therefore it isn't.
yes.
Except, well, it can be. Remote viewers tried to find out where Terry Waite and an American colleague were being held. And it was actually a female remote viewer who said they're being held in a shed in the Bakar Valley. And the Mossad provided some photographs or a map of the area, something like that. I think it was satellite photographs, and said there's no shed there. So this is absolute rubbish. And then it turned out that the photographs were about 3 weeks out of date. And when Terry Waite and his colleague were eventually rescued, they confirmed that actually, yes, indeed, they had been held in the Bakar Valley for a short while, and the shed did exist. It had been built specially to hold them because the hostage takers were in fear of special forces or some sort of rescue attempt. And so the hostages were moved around. Now, if they had acted on what this female remote viewer had told them, they could have got them then. It's not the first time. But the point is, there's confirmation. And I think you've mentioned work with the police, and I'm sure you can confirm this, that actually, when you've got a case, you want to know as little about it as possible. So this is a characteristic, so that you're not being misled or forming pre-impressions. That within remote viewing, there's something called AOL. Nothing to do with internet service providers. It stands for analytical overlay. So you have to be very, very careful about wishful thinking or impressions
Mm,
or ideas that people have dumped on you, as opposed to being totally neutral in your
mm,
observations about what you're seeing. And you have to use neutral language. So, one of the things that they've done at Farsight is develop this very, very neutral language in which you're trying hard not to interpret what you're seeing. So you would talk about a non-surface structure rather than what you think might be an aeroplane, a helicopter, or even a flying saucer. It sounds very, very strange when the remote viewers are talking in this way, but that's to avoid analytical overlay. So, yes, I understand the point you're making, but it is the confirmatory feedback that makes it remote viewing. It is possible for remote viewers to make mistakes simply because they've looked at the wrong timeline. So this gets us into the very nature of reality. Dare I even mention the Matrix? I will wash my mouth out. That we have lots of possibilities on different timelines. You're transcending time and space, so everything is in the now. And one mistake that was classically made, which I think I may have referred to in that article, was that a description of an area was out because it was 50 years in the past. So
mhm,
what they were reporting did exist. It's just it doesn't exist in the here and now. So the timeline, when in time, as well as where in space, is very, very important for pinning this down. It seems like a bit of hair splitting, I know, but at
No, I
the
don't,
end
I
of the
don't, I
day,
don't. No, I think that's fundamentally important, isn't it? Isn't it? So the two examples you've just given there, actually not just beyond time and space, but able to go backwards and forwards
yes,
in time. And so this isn't just a spatial phenomenon.
no,
It's actually incorporating time. And I was watching, you'll know the name Paul H. Smith. He was the
oh
former
yeah,
president of the International Remote Viewing Association, and he's
yeah,
military. He's
yeah,
military intelligence. Then he came out and went into this. Very interesting guy, American,
yeah,
and he was talking about how this causes problems for remote viewing, just as you just
yes,
explained. How if you're, so I know this is not how all remote viewing works, but if one example is where you're given coordinates, global coordinates, and you're just told you're going blind, and what do you see? And he's saying that I can't remember what he was saying. The clues, the intrinsic clues are for whether it's past, future, or now. But he's saying there are clues
Mm.
into, maybe it's the vividness of the description. I know what you're saying about neutral language, but that's not how it's always worked, is it? And the certain vividness of the description will tell you whether this is there now or whether it's in the future, in the past. But the past, you can kind of understand it. Someone's seeing something in the past, that they're picking up something that has actually happened in material reality, whereas someone seeing something from the future that isn't there at the moment, well, that really goes into the realms that over overcomes our usual understanding of physical reality altogether, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
How have you heard anyone sort of come up with a proper explanation for that? Because Paul H. Smith just says, "Oh, it's a interesting phenomenon." He doesn't really sort of look into the philosophy of the massiveness of what that implication might be.
Okay, well, my answer is going to sound like a quote from The Terminator. I'm sure you've seen that film series. Yeah, in which they say that the future isn't fixed. So there are a number of possible futures. In fact, one might say an infinite number of possible futures, depending on whether you decide to turn left or turn right at this particular moment. Um, so there are a number of possibilities, and depending on when a decision gets made at some point in the future and what determines it. I did do an experiment. I think I mentioned on the last show I did, which I well over a year ago. I can't remember how. It was about 18 months or something like that. I can't
Mm.
even remember now.
Yep.
It seems to have gone in a flash. But I think I mentioned that I hosted a series of paranormal lunches. I do about 3 a year. I've rebranded them, by the way. I don't call them paranormal lunches anymore, but they're now called Very Interesting Talks and Lectures, which gives you the acronym VITAL, because some wag told me what was paranormal about the lunch, and I said, well, it's not to do with the food. If you want to smack from the chef, it's the topics that we address. That's the whole point of having people get together for the lunch and then have an interesting speaker. Anyway, on this particular occasion, I got some predictions of recorded remote viewing sessions, one of which we did about three, I think, to see if they came up in the news, and all three of them came up in the news within about a month of the remote viewers naming them. Now, the one that quickly comes to mind, is controversial, was to do with a normal landscape setting in a built-up area in which there was what they called energetics, which is a remote viewing word for explosions or bombs, in particular cluster bombs, which are supposed to be a banned weapon. And the question was, well, in what circumstances would cluster bombs be used in a built-up area? Obviously, very dangerous for civilians and not a military target. And blow me down, lo and behold, in Ukraine,
Mm.
a security camera on a block of flats picked up a Russian missile that had been launched, landed in the car park, and detonated all these cluster bomblets. Um, and this was about a month after Remote Viewer had seen it. Now, cynics would say, "Oh well, oh Ukraine. Well, yeah, you would pick that. What? There's a pretty good chance that something like that would happen in Ukraine." But I could cite many, many examples where the remote viewers had predicted things that cropped up in the news. Now, having said that, it is possible to get it wrong. And the question is why? Or it's not always very clear exactly where and when in time and space that some of the things they're looking at will occur. And just coming back to another point, Neil, that the targeting information needs to be as neutral as possible. But you can say, um, there has been can you speak to a significant event, or even possibly say what the event was, but could you look in the run up to that event, for example, the assassination of JFK? could you remote view the situation in Dealey Plaza roughly 5 minutes before the president is assassinated? So you could say that. Then you are giving a designation about the timing. The other thing you mentioned, because there is a protocol called coordinate remote viewing, but Stargate accidentally found out that you don't need GPS type coordinates. So although you're right about the use of geographic coordinates, believe it or not, it works without it, because one day somebody made a mistake and gave completely the wrong geographic coordinates, but the remote viewer found the target, and they discovered that, oh, actually these coordinates can be quite arbitrary. So I could call Kate's box target 123 456, and as long as we agree that that is target 123 456, a remote viewer could then target that and look at what's in her box. So the targeting coordinates are arbitrary. They don't have to match GPS coordinates, for example. And then
Can
these
I just
accidents with timing, that's another thing. Actually seeing a geographic location, but you're describing the way it was 50 years ago, and that was discovered by accident and looking at historic photographs. Oh, hell, this guy was right. There was a grain silo there 50 years ago. It's just not there today. We thought he was looking at it today. He's for some reason he's looked at it the way it was 50 years ago. So sorry, Kate.
That's okay. I just wanted to go back to what you were saying about the newspaper and asking people to predict something that was going to come up in the news. And one of the things that I can see that would be a problem with that, if you're remote viewing a newspaper and not an event, but a reporting of an event, there is the possibility that you could pick up on things within a newspaper that are not to do with an event. Say it could be a coverage of a movie, or it could be something that's historic that's put into that newspaper. So there is difficulties with that, and you have to be very sensitive about the wording of
Yeah.
what you want specifically. And in terms of going on from that, what is there reported differences between the people who ask the questions and the remote viewers? Say, for instance, are some people more accurate when they're asked by a specific person? I'm going into that woo-woo land of thinking
Mm.
that the energy that somebody gives off can assist
Yeah,
in
that's
that
right.
process or can stop a process from occurring.
Correct. And it was found that that is the case. In the
Oh,
Stargate type remote viewing, there would be somebody in the room with the remote viewer. They would they could transfer information telepathically, even, I think.
yes.
So yes, I'll call it contamination. There is a
Yeah.
risk of contamination. So what Farsight remote viewers have done, very often the targeting request is in writing, that the remote viewers don't have somebody with them. They do an initial look at what their task is. It's in neutral language, done in totally blind conditions. They might just form some impressions and write down pages of notes before they do a more detailed viewing. That you don't have one remote viewer looking at the target. It's not unusual for Farsight to use 4 or 5 remote viewers. And I want you to imagine that maybe a room in I don't know, let's say a room in Neil's house or something, which maybe you could approach from different sides. You could go into it and walk through the main door and notice that he's got a photograph on his wall of something. I could walk in there and notice a book on his bookshelf. And then somebody else could go in there and look at what it is he's been drinking in his goblet. And yet here we are in the same room, but with our own independent perspectives and what's caught our attention. So although it's the same room, you would then get 3 very different remote viewing reports. You might report Kate on who it is stuck on his wall there. I might notice that he's got a rather good UFO book on his bookshelf, and somebody else who was worried about what he was drinking would discover it's a medieval goblet or something with the finest red wine in it or something. And yet it's the same time and space. So yes, there are those different perspectives, but it's a good idea to have 4 or 5 remote viewers. But obviously, what they're looking at isn't exactly the same. They're going to have that different perspective.
They get multiples of remote viewers. Are they in the same room?
No.
I'm just no, they're all in separate locations
They're
from
well,
each other.
they can be. I mean, the remote viewers in Stargate had an old World War II building in Fort Meade that was
Mm,
allocated to them. So yes, they were operating in the same building. But with Farsight, sometimes they are in a studio setting for video recording purposes, but maybe independently. One comes in one day and is recorded, another one comes in another, or some are doing it from home. One of the best remote viewers in the world is Daz Smith, who I had a lot of cooperation from. In fact, his photograph is in the. He supplied that photograph to me. He's sitting there with Ingo Swan.
mm,
Now Daz is down in Bristol. And then Dick Algire, who gave me permission to use a photograph of where he had remote viewed DNA. So there's a nice
mhm.
little scientific twist for Neil. He's actually looked at DNA, and he's based in Hawaii. So a lot of the remote viewers can cooperate and come together to release their findings via Zoom, for example. Oh, a bit like we're doing here, but
Mhm.
they are in physical, separate geographic locations. But there is that contamination risk.
And do they have you spoken to them about their personal experience and what just has anybody expressed what they go through? Is it something that they push themselves out, or is it just imagery? Is it all in the head, or do they feel
Okay,
any
yeah.
sensations?
Yeah, there are different flavors of remote viewing, and some of the remote viewers are more prone to senses and smells and
Mm,
tastes and that sort of thing. Others, it's a bit like I'll say neuro-linguistic programming, whether they're more visual, auditory, or kinesthetic, which is a posh word for touchy-feely. But yes, those impressions are important. And something that's never really discussed is the emotional effect on the remote viewers when they've seen something that's quite shocking. I'm not sure if I'm picking the right example to give your viewers. I don't want to shock them or cause complaints, but some remote viewers at Farsight looked at the Barney and Betty Hill abduction
mm,
to see, well, was that real? Did it happen? And they saw some aspects. They number one, they confirmed it was real. They really did have an encounter. They really were subjected to very personal and intrusive physical examinations.
mm,
But the nature of some of those investigations was kept secret because at the time when John Fuller did the book Incident at Exeter, some of that was too graphic for a sensitive audience, and it was edited out of the book. But years later, some of that detail came out and was confirmed in what the remote viewers had seen. Well, one of the remote viewers, I remember, got very, very upset about what she saw being done to Barney Hill. I won't go into detail here, but she got very, very upset about it. So sometimes remote viewers see very unpleasant things that they think is disgusting, or what's that, or they're really upset about harm that's done to somebody, that type of thing. And it can have an emotional effect on them as well, leaving them, because they are so fully immersed in the experience, they're reliving it.
mm.
So,
And
so
is
that
there
yeah,
is there sorry, I was
so,
just
so
wondering whether they'd come up with an explanation of why human beings can do this. Has
What,
anybody
sorry, do you
pumped
mean
for an
why they have the ability to do it?
mm, yeah.
Um, well, it seems the suggestion is that we all potentially have that ability. It can be trained, but there seems to be some evidence that forgive me, I'm going to use the psychic word, that psychic abilities in us have been suppressed somehow. And yet it's if in dealings with extraterrestrials, telepathy, this ESP type ability is natural, and and a lot of communication with extraterrestrial entities is telepathic. Even though if we were to sit in some respectable scientific institution, somebody would get up and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, this hasn't been properly established. It's not scientific. There's no such thing." Well, I'm afraid there is, but whether we've
Mm.
got a really good scientific explanation for it is another thing. But it probably goes back to early stages in our evolution, where it would be very handy to know if you were going down a footpath somewhere and there might be a saber-toothed tiger hanging about around the corner. So it's a case of the way information is available to all of us if you were just on the right frequency to be able to access it. So we
But
live in an energy universe. That's the
Mm.
trick here, I think. And if you think in terms of frequency, and that sort of thing, you won't be far off the mark.
yeah, and of course, uh, we know without a shadow of doubt that remote viewing does work. It doesn't always work, but it happens.
Yeah.
It happens. And for a reductionist materialist, that cannot be. They are
Yeah.
so ideologically captured that they just, as you say, well, no, it can't be. You
Yeah, it
haven't,
can't be, therefore it isn't.
exactly. So well, that's their problem, I think, rather than the people who are studying remote viewing. But just going back to what Kate raised about the feeling of a remote viewer and what that encompasses. And I've read a few, including Ingo Swann, but there are others who just do describe it as an altered state of consciousness, not necessarily in like a psychedelic
Yeah.
state or even a meditative state, but it's akin to that. And one of the things that Swan talks about is because he also had out of body experiences, which he said were specifically different than the remote viewing experiences that he had
Yeah. Yeah.
in an OBE, because a lot of people are going to be thinking, well, a remote viewer's consciousness must come out of the brain and go somewhere like they do in an OBE. But
Yeah. Good point.
well, I've had my own experiences of OBEs and reading other people's experiences. Once it happens, the world, you don't see the same world as you see through your thought, through your senses. You don't visualize the
That's right.
same as the optic cortex visualizes the world. It's almost the same, but it's slightly different. That it's kind of got a dream overlay, even though it's astoundingly real. So I just wanted to put. I mean, if you've got anything to say to that, Bob, we're not talking. OBEs do not correlate directly with remote viewing.
No, correct. Because a remote viewer is conscious of, well, just like I could be taking some notes right here at my desk now. You're conscious of the fact that you're taking notes, but you're getting mental impressions. An out of body experience is where you can observe yourself, from a corner of the ceiling. So
Yes.
you are aware that you have left your body. But a remote viewer is conscious of the fact that they're at their desk or in their comfy chair or whatever situation they're in, even writing down, taking notes of the distant mental impressions that they're getting.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not the same thing.
Yeah.
But there is a very fine line because there has been many experiments and people recounting out of body experiences in hospitals where they've been able to remote view through out of body experience and take back information. I mean, I can't remember who did it, but there was one where I think it was the Xena cards were placed on top of a cabinet in a room, in a resource room.
Yeah.
And that information was relayed back. So I think with remote viewing there is an altered state, definitely, but it's not to that intensity. It's like there is literally a cat's whisker between all these things, between being a psychic seer, being a remote viewer, having out of body experiences, taking yourself out of your body. And it's all about this expansion of your own energy and taking that into another place in another existence in whatever way. For me, when I'm remote viewing, I can see through people's eyes. So I'll take myself into a person's body. I do that with their permission. I don't do that willy-nilly. So I wouldn't sort of jump into anybody's body. But I can also do it by giving literally just a photograph of somebody's front door and I can go into a property. And you were talking about being able to see things in the past and the future. I've been into properties where I've explained the property with two staircases running up either side of the property, which had actually been removed sort of in the 1960s out of that
Oh,
property. So
oh,
I was
okay.
seeing it in the past. But it's all for me, it's in the same mixing pot. It's all the same kind of energetic manipulation. And I find it very strange to start stretching those out into individual pockets when they all are of the same ilk. It's and I do get hung up on this whole remote viewing and military complex side of things. So anyway, I'm rambling. I do apologise.
Well, no, yeah, yes, it's a tricky one, and it's not easy to come up with definitions. But there are those nuances and fine lines, and we're a bit short on vocabulary. Let's be honest, to
Mm.
accurately describe one thing over another. So that is an issue. There are a couple of other things I wanted to touch on, if I may, because it
Mhm.
tidies up some loose ends with my previous appearance. I thought it would be appropriate for me to I know this sounds like I'm plugging books, but when I did the article, I was trying to show where I was getting sources of information from. But one of the developments, and I don't know if you can see that very clearly, was Lou Elizondo's book, Imminent. And the significance of this book is that he is a Pentagon insider. He is a whistleblower. So I was very, very interested to see that. And excuse me, I'm going to put my glasses on because I want to get this right. But on page 34, it turns out that Lou was being considered as a remote viewer himself. He had remote viewing capabilities. It's just that at the time, his army contact was trying to recruit him as a remote viewer, the funding had been pulled. So he thought he was going to be recruited into the Stargate program, but actually wasn't, but did have these abilities and was able to use remote viewing in other aspects of his work. So that was quite interesting. That came as a revelation. A couple of other revelations. There was a whole chapter on orbs. I won't go into that now, but that he says in here as a whistleblower, he was shocked at how frequently orbs had been reported, and not just by the military, in civilian situations and that sort of thing as well. The other thing, just a loose end from the previous appearance, I think Neil asked me something along the lines of the definition of a UAP and what's the difference between a UAP and a UFO. I won't go over all the old ground again. If people aren't familiar with what, maybe they should look at that old show. But I mentioned there were 5 observables, Neil. But in this book, he does actually reveal that there is a 6th observable that seems to have been classified before, and that is physiological effects on humans that have observed these objects. So the 5 observables very quickly were sudden and instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic velocity without any signatures, low observability, transmedium travel, the ability to travel in the sea, air, land, space, and positive lift. No obvious engines, means of propulsion, and what have you. So those 5 observables defined a UAP as opposed to just a common or garden UFO. But there was a 6th observable, which is the physiological effects on people. So that one has been sort of kept a little bit quiet. But I didn't realize that this particular whistleblower had remote viewing capability himself. So that was, lots of juicy stuff in there. It was a really good read. But anyway, I digress.
Just show us the book again, Bob.
Yeah.
Just
Well, what I'll do, if I may, I'll do what I did before. I will supply you with some references so that interested viewers can check what I'm talking about. It's not, don't trust what I'm saying. Go and check it out for yourself. So this is called Imminent, and this is by Lou Elizondo, a Pentagon insider. The inside dirt on UAPs, if you like. And the cover photograph is one of those US Navy photographs which have been confirmed by the Navy as authentic.
Yeah.
And made interesting because it's using instrumented detection. So there's lots of data accompanying the photograph that the pilot can see about speed, direction, and all that sort of
Yeah.
thing.
And
Very good. But
on that note, I've got to swing it, Neil. I've got to swing it. We cannot go anywhere without chatting about recent developments and getting
no,
your
no, no.
view on.
Hold on. Leave that till
Oh,
the
okay,
end.
okay, okay.
Leave that to the end because
I
there's
know, but I want a good chunk of that, and we've like got about 15, 20 minutes.
Well, I
well,
tell you what, look, let me just do a minute on it, Neil, and then
go,
hopefully that. But I
go on.
think the significant thing here, because it's mentioned in Luis Elizondo's book, he says something to the effect, if you'd said to him 5 or 10 years ago where we would be now with this subject, he wouldn't have believed it because there's been deliberate misinformation and so on and so forth. What's changed big time is the United States Congress passing laws for whistleblowers like Luis Elizondo, like the pilots who took those photographs, to come forward and testify to Congress. And I think the big interesting thing is it possible, regardless of what you think of Donald Trump, let's not go there, but is Donald Trump the president that could be the one presiding over disclosure and spilling the beans on all sorts of things? Can we finally have all the files declassified on the JFK assassination? Can we have disclosure now? Can we have the truth about is there an alien presence or whatever you want to call it? So these are the big questions where it starts to get very interesting. But the key thing is lawmakers have made it possible for whistleblowers to come forward, and plenty of whistleblowers have come forward. There were hearings in November, and there are plans to have more hearings. I think Elizondo will be called back, as will some of the pilots. And there are members of Congress who are determined to get to the bottom of what's been going on for all these years. But having said that, there is a pocket of resistance within the Department of Defense. And although I'm talking about America, the same could be said to be true of the British government. I had my own dealings with the Ministry of Defence where they trotted out their standard blurb on it, and then it turns out through something called Project Condign, we now learn that they were really interested in the subject all along and did consider that it was of defence significance. It's just they were telling us that it wasn't. The defence significance or the risk or whatever you want to call it is having weird and wonderful objects in our airspace that potentially could crash into civilian or military aircraft and pose a hazard if you don't know they're around and
Okay,
whose are they?
okay. So in terms of weird and wonderful objects, I think what Kate was actually getting at was the developments in the last few days. Anyone looking at social media or even the mainstream news will see that we seem to have a drone flap
Oh, right. Okay.
concentrated in New Jersey, America, but also elsewhere, and it's very difficult to get under the skin of this one because the you know if the drones at the Pentagon are saying, oh, we don't know what they are, but they're not from a foreign country, they're not ours. Well, what are they? And are they indeed drones, or are we conflating actual pictures of military style drones with other video and photos that I've been seeing that do not look like drones at all?
Mm.
I mean, I know we've gone off subject from remote viewing, but it's a very topical subject. What do you think's going on?
Right, it's a weird mix. Drones are topical because the technology has developed far more rapidly than people appreciate, and it's caused by the situation in Ukraine. So drone technology has been developed very, very quickly and effectively as a weapon of warfare. So there's that. There's also going on in parallel with that the fact that we're being told that disclosure and extraterrestrial contact is formally imminent. Um, and that brings us back to the mention of all these orbs. So there's a question that some orbs seem to be intelligent entities, but some orbs seem to be intelligence gathering devices that represent some sort of technology. So we're back into this argument about, well, whose technology is this, which resonates with the whole UAP issue. Um, some of the drones, because there has been a big crisis, New Jersey, I think, comes to mind, the number that have been flown over US bases, quite possibly, and that they're being used as spying devices by foreign agencies because so much has been learnt about drone warfare to the cost of the Russians in the Russian-Ukraine conflict.
But this is what I mean about the not being able to get under the skin of it, because if these were Iranian or Russian drones, they wouldn't be lit up like Belisha beacons, would they? That kind of undermines that argument totally.
Yeah, that is there is an element of that. There have also been some very strange looking drones filmed, so not really being called drones, but being called UAPs. So again, there's this difference between something that is actual technology. Now, one of the claims that's being made is that there are extraterrestrials that are in a hurry to reveal themselves, and this is a controversial area as well. It is relevant. I'll try not to get too far off course because my time's nearly up. But one of the controversial things is that the remote viewers at Farsight are saying that their contact with extraterrestrials is telling them that the extraterrestrials, who they call the friendly ETs, want contact in the open now. Whereas, dare I mention Bashar, who we were talking about, he talks about he's a channeled entity, but he's talking about the possibility of open ET contact in the next 2 or 3 years. So there are contradictory messages through what we're receiving through channeled information, what we're receiving from remote viewers. So it's not matching up nicely. But sightings of drones and sightings of more UFOs, UAPs is supposedly on the agenda for developing a wider awareness as a prelude to contact, open contact, whenever that may be. So it's a murky world. I think the short answer to your question, Neil, if there is one, is that some of it is people taking a risk flying actual drones that are lit up and seeing what they can get away with. Some of it is down to military spying, and some of it appears to be down to technology. You know, whose technology is this? Just like the UAP argument. So some of it seems to fit into the UAP category.
Yeah.
Certainly very, very advanced technology showing off capabilities that we didn't know existed. But there's been a lot of innovation in the Ukraine war. For example, some of the drones are made of cardboard, very lightweight, very cheap, and are now using very sophisticated technology that the Russians can't jam because they're not relying on GPS information. They're using chips from other devices which have got all the pre-programmed geographical information in it. So it's not there isn't a radio controlled signal that will jam it. It's running off of the intelligence in a chip that's built into a cardboard drone. There's virtually no defense against it.
Yeah.
It's not even possible to really detect it through any of the classical radar systems because you're trying to detect a bit of flying cardboard.
Yeah,
I think
no,
one of
well,
the look,
in terms of
we
the
were
New
just
Jersey thing, we just have to see how it develops. I mean, it's so difficult getting behind the layers of this at the moment. It's so much flying around on social media as it always does these days. We just have to wait and see.
Well, can I come back on a point, Neil, that you raised in the previous broadcast? Because you asked me a topical question at the time about Chinese spy balloons and
Mm,
other things that have been seen and shot down. We haven't heard an awful lot more about what they found.
right.
So I don't know if we ever will, because obviously, if it's been possible to look at what some of the payloads of these devices were, you know, there may be very good reasons for not publicizing what they found out about what that technology is and what it was capable of. And I don't think people are aware, because I had this conversation bizarrely in a pub with somebody. They weren't aware that there were different forms of warfare, such as not killing people, but a war going on over microprocessor technologies. And the basic principle is that technologies have been winning wars since 1066. So there is a battle going on over microprocessor technologies and capabilities within computing and information technology. And that is a very real battle that's going on for supremacy in those technology fields.
What are your personal beliefs? Do you think that alien contact is imminent? Is that something that would you be excited about? What are your sort of
Well,
personal feelings on that?
interesting because I remember you saying on the last broadcast how terrified you were by the scene in Close Encounters when the
Yes.
aliens finally show up and reveal themselves. I think it would be the most important day in our history. I think it's inevitable. Yes, big argument about when it's going to come. I'm concerned about what Dr. Courtney Brown has highlighted because there's a clear contradiction between channeled information through Bashar saying that the extraterrestrials want to contact us within the next 2 or 3 years when they gauge that we're ready. And what the remote viewers at Farsight are telling us is that there are good ETs and bad ETs, and indifferent ETs. So as above, so below. And that the good ETs want contact now so that everything is in the open. Because if secrecy is maintained, as you will have seen with the fall of the Syrian regime, that secrecy has allowed all sorts of obscene things to go on that nobody knew anything about, didn't realize how bad things were. So secrecy is a very good way of concealing hidden agendas. Whereas allegedly the good ETs want everything out in the open and want people to be aware, and they're friendly. But that then gets us into another realm about, well, what do they want? But yes, I think it's imminent. It's not far away. Whether it's going to be next month or in 3 years' time, I don't know. But I think it's inevitable because remote viewing has showed that the universe is absolutely teeming with life. One of the people that is mentioned in my Haunted article made their database available to me, and I got the shock of my life because in their book, they had only publicized a few of the most interesting aspects of their investigation. But I got the shock that the database of what had been remote viewed was far more extensive. And then the penny dropped that the book they published was just not able to devote all the space to the topic. Just like I wrote 14 pages for Haunted magazine, and they've had to chop it into 2 bits. But I guess that I got carried away, like I did on your last broadcast. Anyway,
Well,
I promised to behave.
no, we're always happy to go off on tangents on Hare and the Hawthorn, as we have tonight. But are out of time almost. But I've got to mention. I said we were going to come back to Ingo Swann,
Oh
and
yeah,
I wanted to talk to him about him for a little longer because he's such an interesting character, very colourful character. I think you'll agree, Bob.
absolutely.
Um, and so I'll just say this, and then perhaps you can talk about very briefly, just the books to go to, the go-to books, if you or websites if to find out about remote viewing. But Ingo Swann's sort of autobiography is called Penetration: The
Yeah,
Question of Extraterrestrial and Human Telepathy. Slightly misleading title, I think, for what is actually in the book, because you talked earlier about him remote viewing Jupiter extremely accurately, amazingly accurate.
yeah,
That that's mind blowing enough. But he's also been on the dark side of the moon,
yeah.
and coming back with what we were talking about just a few minutes ago, he was remote viewing the aliens
That's
or
right.
whatever they were, ultra terrestrials, aliens. We've been saying extraterrestrials. You know, we can go to that's another discussion for another time. What are they? But there were some kind of intelligent life forms working on the dark side of the moon. Ingo Swann saw them, and they saw him.
That's right.
Interestingly, they were observing him, observing them, and they didn't like it. And there's a great UFO story in Alaska in this book, and also a very sexy woman extraterrestrial in a supermarket in Los Angeles.
That's
That's
right.
that's all I'm going to say about that.
She
So
was very dangerous
yes, she was.
because there was an issue about how to detect hybrids, hybrids, and extraterrestrials. And this comes back to telepathic and mind reading abilities.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which he talks about in this book. But so that was my introduction to remote viewing, that reading that book, which is probably not the best introduction. You need to go to that a bit later. So what would very briefly, Bob, if someone doesn't really know much about remote viewing, has watched this, has been interested in it, where should they go?
Well, I think the best thing I can do is supply you with a list of references that you can drop in underneath on your listing. So you did this once before. There are quite a few. The very first one I read was actually the book by David Morehouse called Psychic Spies, because that was a bit of a pull in. And I think one question you didn't ask me is how I got involved in this. And I actually published an article on remote viewing when I was the editor of Quest for Knowledge magazine. A friend of mine had done a course run by David Morehouse. So David was one of the first Stargate original remote viewers. So he had that military background. So I got into a row with the publisher because he didn't know what remote viewing was and didn't want the article to go in there. And I had a bit of a cat fight as to, look, who's the editor? I'm the editor, you're the publisher. We need to get this stuff out there. But back in the day, a lot of people, this was around about 2000, a lot of people had never heard of it, didn't know what it was. There have, since David's book came out, there have been a lot of very, very good books. So I'll give you a list. Some of them are referred to in the Haunted magazine article, but not everybody will see that. Some of the best ones, like Major Ed Dames, Tell Me What You See. He was also a Stargate remote viewer. I'll have a little think about that, and I'll give you a list if I may, and then if you can shove it under the
I'll
listings
put it in the
part
comment.
in
Yeah,
the
it will
commentary.
definitely. Well, I will urge people to go and buy Haunted magazine,
Yeah, it's a
and they will
great
see some of
magazine
those.
that.
It is a great magazine, and because some of those references are in there. So, and there's other great stuff in it as well. So you get that bonus. Yeah, the article is very good. It's a very good springboard into understanding the basics, and I'm looking forward to seeing the second part of that
Part
coming out
two.
early next year. Yeah,
I
part
won't. I
two.
won't spoil the surprise. Yes, you'll have to go and buy your March edition or whatever it is when it comes out. That's my fault. I wasn't given any parameters and I got carried away. But one thing that writers will know, people like you, Kate, is it forces you to pull together what you know or what you think you know about a subject. It did actually take me a long time to pull it together. And I did check all the references. And incidentally, Neil, talking about the book that you just mentioned, you really want the version 3 of the book. There's a third version come out that's been updated. So I'll mention that in the references as well. But Swan's adventures are really fantastic.
They certainly are, yeah.
Yeah.
I need to ask this: is that Teal Swan? Is Teal
No,
Swan his?
no, no,
No.
Ingo's one.
no. It's
Yeah,
Ingo
but
Swan.
I know it's Ingo Swan, but is Teal Swan related? There's a lady who does
Yeah,
psychic
I know.
development
I
online,
don't
and I
think so. I'll double check. I'm not sure. I
yeah.
don't think so. I don't
If
think there's a
anybody knows,
connection.
drop it in the comment because it's
Yeah.
always because they're very very similar in their kind of, they're very open to different ways of working, and I often wonder whether there was a relationship there between the two. So yeah,
I'll try
I
and look
think
into that one. Good question.
yeah, that would be interesting. I think we're about at time.
Yeah,
I
you
think
better chuck
that
We
me off.
are.
we would never chuck you off. I mean, it's a subject that we could talk all night about, and I could certainly banter backwards and forwards because some of this really sits uncomfortably with me. I can't tell you how, and it's definitely not you, Bob. It is how it's kind of put out into the world from a scientific point of view, and it's like sometimes I just think we need to just go screw you science, it is what it is, and just accept it and go with it, and it's the best way to get on with it. But that's just my irritant, that's a me problem.
Well, thank you for asking me to come and clear up some of your dodgy subjects. I hope I've given it my best shot, so I hope that's
You've
dealt
done
with
brilliantly.
the UFO UAP thing and the remote viewing thing. Give me some warning if there are any other dodgy subjects that you think you need to bring me
There's
in
a
on.
lot,
And
lot.
thanks to Neil for that scientific grounding and keeping us earthed. I think that's important. Although
Bless you.
the scientific method, I used to work in a research laboratory, so
Mhm.
it's great if you want to reproduce an experiment with certain chemicals at a known temperature, pressure, and volume, you
Yeah, of
should be
course.
able to reproduce that experiment in the same conditions that I was able to do it. But as Charles Fort found, there are just some things that don't fit the scientific method.
Of course.
And
And
I think in your article, you I can't remember what the exact quote is, but you said something along the lines of a lack of evidence doesn't mean there's no evidence at all,
yeah,
or
absence of
something.
evidence is not
Yeah,
evidence of absence. Yeah,
Yes.
that's the one. That's the one, and
that's the one.
that's where I'm at. That's where I'm at.
We
Just
can
because you
agree on that.
can't get it in a lab doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
That's right.
Can I just say before you say goodbye, Kate, you get these little
Yeah.
pop-ups for videos that come up, and this one's just popped up from Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio. How to survive the 2025 apocalypse.
Oh,
So
great.
I'm off to watch that after this.
Nice. Thank you so much, Bob, for
Thank you for
joining us.
having me.
And
I've
I
enjoyed it.
think when we have that alien invasion, which a lot of people are predicting it's going to be in the first quarter of next year, I'm hoping so because it will make for an interesting new year. When that happens, we'll get you back and see where we're all at with the alien counter thing. How about that?
Okay, that sounds good. I'll see you after the apocalypse then.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you for having me.
Thank you,
Thanks
Bob.
so
Really
much.
appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.